Hey, this is Jeremy. I was just going to do a little update video on my Baja boat project. Got the engine out, got it tore down. Kind of disappointed in what I found. I do have the block at the machine shop along with all my rotating assembly. I'm going to take some measurements, get all the rotating crank and rods and such balanced up. Get the block machined out. I'm going 40 over on the block. It didn't need to go 40 over. Actually, it could probably just been dingle ball honed. The motor was really clean. Here, I'll show you the heads. I did not wash any of these parts. These are as they come off the engine. You look at that crank. It is clean. There is the inside of the valve cover. There is no crud. I have not washed these, not hit them with brake clean, nothing. Real, oops, sorry, my finger's in the way. Real clean. All the valves, the thing was running on all 8 and running pretty good. Everything looked pretty good in them. But what I was disappointed about is the fact that being a marine engine, I always kind of had the assumption that they were built a little better than a car engine or your standard fare passenger car. You'd think they'd at least maybe pull out of a Corvette line or off the Camaro line or something when they snag an engine, that it'd have a little bit better specs. And that is not the case. This was a 2-bolt block, cast crank, cast pistons, nothing special. The only thing I see different than what would come in your run-of-the-mill Impala Caprice was I did mic the camshaft out. I checked the lobe lift on it, and it is a little bit bigger than what would have been in a passenger car. You figure that year, 350. This block is actually an 85. I got this boat is titled as an 83, but I actually believe it's an 85 or 86. I run the serial number on the outdrive and the engine. Now the engine, you run the number on the engine, it gives you a range. It's between this year and this year. It's not really particular. But the lower unit is. And there was no indication that this short block was ever out of this boat. But the serial number on the lower unit there is in 1985. I got on the internet, researched. It's actually a 200 Sport is the model number of this boat. It was originally built in Bucharest, Ohio, in what was at one time a bowling alley. Well, that factory burnt sometime, I'm not sure, I can't remember what year, 90s or something. And the company was basically done. The factory burnt down along with all the records and everything to do it. And now Bajas are made in Florida. And I've called them up and asked them about, gave them the whole number. They don't know it. They don't know how to cross-reference it. The whole number does end in an 83. Maybe that's why it's always been titled as an 83. But I've only been able to find a couple other of these boats. And they're all 85s or 86s. They're kind of hard to find a picture of one. Apparently they're kind of rare. I really think this is an 85 or 86, regardless of what the title says. But with that being said, the average engine of 85 or 86, you're talking about a 350 in like a Caprice or even a pickup, half-ton pickup. Man, you're talking 180, 190 horsepower is what them engines are rated at. Net horsepower. Now I don't understand that's not gross. I don't know how Mercruiser rates their engines, if they're gross or net. I did call Mercruiser up when I run the deals, and the guy on the phone, he said they test them with the accessories on them. They are dyno tested, or one out of a batch is dyno tested. And they rate theirs, of this vintage, they're 260 horse. In 87 or 88, when they went to the roller cam motors, the one-piece rear main seal. Then they bumped it up to 270 horse. This is 260, and you figure, well, hell, it's got to have something better about it. The only thing different I could see with this is the head gasket. Let me dig in the trash here and see if I can find one. They have, it looks to be a stainless steel. It ain't an MLS, it's a one-piece gasket. It's not a multi-layer gasket. But it's an embossed steel gasket, just a stainless steel shim gasket with embossed, kind of like half of a MLS gasket. But there's the head gasket. Whereas a passenger car, this vintage would have a what they call a compressed gasket, like a Felpro style gasket, composition gasket. I guess is what I should say. It's called a composition gasket. That's just a flat steel shim gasket. Pretty thin too, so I'm assuming the thickness of that it had a little higher compression. You know what, I'll measure the thickness of it. We'll come up with a number. I'll find my micrometer. Not in here. Sorry if I make you dizzy or sick. I'm not trying. Let's see here. I just know I have a pair of calipers around here somewhere. Oh, there they are. Sorry, I am pretty low tech here. I don't have a fancy camera. Make sure that thing's zeroed out. I don't have a fancy camera. See that? That part of the gasket's 21 thousandths. See the compressed thickness. Granted, they're a little cruddy. I'm getting about 28. So this engine probably had a little bit higher compression. You're talking standard, you're somewhere 40 to 50 thousandths. This is half of that. So it probably had a quarter point more compression than your standard passenger car fare. And I imagine it's running that kind of gasket because it's a marine engine. It's running raw water or salt water through it. Not running antifreeze through these, so they probably use that stainless steel gasket for corrosion reasons. And the camshaft, like I said, was probably a little bit more aggressive than your standard passenger car fare. Other than that, I can't find anything different. Intake manifold wasn't nothing special, other than it wasn't an EGR manifold. Trying to think, that's about it. So if you think you got a marine engine, and because it's a marine engine, it's something special, when you get down to the bare bones of it, it's not. And man, was I surprised by the weight of those cast iron exhausts. Very heavy. I don't know, I haven't weighed them to know. As you can see, a power steering system there. It had a cable. The steering was cable operated from the helm back to the transom, and it had power assist. Walk around here and kind of show you the setup. I did away with this setup. I'm going strictly manual hydraulic. And that's it. There's the old helm. There's the old helm. There's the cable that run up to the helm. And there's the hydraulic assist pump. It leaked. Most of the oil in the bottom of this boat come from the power steering. Motor was dry, really clean engine. Most of that oil and crud that I got down in this boat came from either that pump or the hydraulic assist, and the power steering pump that was up here was leaking. What you see there is what I'm replacing it with. I kind of had to take a shortcut. A lot of the high-end boats, they'll have a exterior transom mounted 1 or 2 hydraulic cylinders that will mount over here and come over here to the lower unit, in a triangulated pattern. Some of them just run the one side, depending on horsepower. That's actually the preferred way to go. It's just a stronger system, take more abuse. But those are also on a lot heavier boat. This isn't a very big boat. It's a 20-foot boat. It's a shallow V. It's not a deep V. It has a hull a lot like a bass boat. It's not super heavy. So I don't think I need that much steering power. So what I'm running is this Sea Star branded Merc Cruiser, and it's a Merc Cruiser cylinder. Bolts right up, pretty simple, and all I'm going to have is that cylinder, and there's going to be 2 hydraulic lines that run up along the boat up to that helm, and that's also a Sea Star helm. And this acts as the pump also. This ain't just what the steering wheel bolts to. You see there's a fill cap at the top, and that's where you fill and bleed all the air out of the system. 2 fittings on the back that the line's hooked to, and that's it. Have that, basically like an orbital valve, that for a pump, and then the cylinder in the back, 2 hoses. I like simple, and that's about as simple as you can get in a boat. What else am I gonna do? Well, you know what, I don't wanna get too far off track with the engine. That's the main project here. I was really hoping it was a 4-bolt block. You know, usually more is better, and 4 bolts are usually better than 2. And when it was a 2-bolt, that meant, well, my options changed. Now I'm either gonna have to, if I want the 4-bolt strength, I'm gonna have to either buy an aftermarket block, find a good used block, and or turn my 2-bolt into a 4-bolt via splayed mains. So I started researching the various costs of this stuff. Putting splayed mains on it usually just involves the 3 center caps, and it can get pretty pricey. You can buy some cheap Chinese-made caps. They are steel. You can buy them cap sets for $70, but by the time you put the caps, the good hardware, you have to rebore the crank bore on it and then hone it. And after you do all that machine work, you're going to have somewhere about $500 wrapped up just in converting that to a 4-bolt block. Now the splayed main is stronger than a traditional 4-bolt main. When I'm talking about a splayed main, the center 2 are going to be just like on a 2-bolt block. They're going to go straight up and down. I wish I had a block here to show you. I don't. But, well, this here, you kind of imagine that this here is a crank journal in the block. 2-bolt block has 2 bolts. Well, splayed main, it's going to have a wider cap, and the 2 outer bolts are going to be splayed and go into the webbing of the block more towards the actual sidewall or the pan rail of the block. They're going to go at an angle in. So you'll have 2 studs here and then 2 bolts on either side going in, and they'll be pulling from the sides of the block. They are stronger than a 4-bolt block where the bolts go straight in like these 2 bolts here, and then you'll have another one here and here. And a lot of times if you look at a 4-bolt block, you'll look at these outer bolts, and if you look in the inside of the block under the bottom side, you'll see where the holes are actually exposed at the bottom underneath in a really thin part of the webbing. That's why a splayed main is better than a traditional main. But I don't know, I talked to my machine shop here in town, told him what I was wanting to do, the compression I was running, and he advised me to stick with the 2-bolt block. You know, by the time you find a 4-bolt block, nowadays you used to be able to find them for $100. Nowadays, I mean, just to find one all rusted up, you're going to talk $250, $300, and then it still might not be any good. You might have to do, you know, go through a couple of 3 blocks before you find one that's good. I ain't got the time or patience for that. Can't seem to find any of these engine shops, the nationwide engine shops that sell a 2-piece rear main 4-bolt block anymore, already machined. I can find the 1-piece machined blocks for about $850 to $1,000. Factory, they call them seasoned blocks. It's just a factory OEM block that they've done all the machine work on and got it ready to assemble. They are 4-bolt main, but they're a 1-piece rear main seal crank block. And I ain't gonna do that. So either way, splaying my block or going with a factory 4-bolt is gonna end up running about the same money. Aftermarket 4-bolt block, which is what I'd really like to do, you're talking $1,500 for a Chinese import, up to $2,500 for a Dart or a Brodex or a good block, a US made block. I think Blueprint makes one that's decent. I ain't gonna spend that kind of money on it. Talked to my machine shop, he said stick with the 2-bolt, don't worry about it. Use ARP studs, balance your rotating assembly within an inch of its life, or maybe I should say within a gram of its life. He said, and you'll be just fine for running 72, 7,300 RPM. The power levels I'm looking at making, he said it'll live. He says I'm running a good crank, I'm running good rods. He says it should survive. I rebuilt my carburetor, that little old 750 Edelbrock. Let's see if I can get this down without dropping it. Oh, not an Edelbrock, I should say. Look at that number there. It is a Carter 750. See if I can get this down without dropping it. I wanted something that flowed just a little bit better than 750. I think 750 for the power level I'm wanting to make is right on the line. I really wanted an HP Holly or a variant thereof, but I just don't have the money in the budget for it. I didn't even have the money in the budget to buy just an old 750 double pumper Holly and do the work myself. Well, I had this 750 I keep saying Edelbrock, it's a Carter. And let me show you a factory one. This is what the top of the carburetor looks like. Choke horn, shafts over the secondaries, choke horn shaft or choke blade shaft over the primaries, a lot of extra linkage. Go back and show you what I did. Poor man's HP. Spent some time on this the other day. I milled the choke horn off of it. Took all that linkage out of it. It really opened up pretty nice. I don't know how much more this is going to flow. I might even have to rejet it. I rebuilt it, put it right back to factory specs on every aspect. I need more fuel flow into it. So I'm taking off the factory 3/8 inlet. I'm going to put a -8, which is a 1/2 inch inlet, a -8 line hose adapter there. All the linkage is gone. And the shafts, where the linkage shaft runs through the carburetor, if you could see there, I drilled and tapped it for a pipe plug. Got a little 1/8 inch pipe plug in both sides there. Seal that up so there's no exterior leaks in. One other thing I may do, because it's in a boat, these are the bowl vents here. I may take a piece of copper tube, flatten it out a little bit, form it to this shape, press it down in here in the vents, have them come up and either curve in, or I'll have them come up and put a piece of hose on them and then drill a hole in the hose for fuel slosh. Marine carburetors always have what they call a J vent. It comes over and dumps. That way, if you ever get any slosh in the bowls, the fuel ends up just going back into the carburetor and doesn't get away from the carb. Most boats run what they call a flame arrestor or a spark arrestor. And it's something you have to have in a boat to keep any sort of flame from getting into here. or any sort of flame from getting out of here into your engine compartment where you may have fuel fumes causing a boat fire. This isn't a marine carburetor. The only difference between them really is marine carburetor in this. Some of the parts in this that are steel would be a brass, and the vents. So I might do the vents. What else? Oh, the fuel system here. I got the fuel system all sorted out. This is the factory fuel filter pickup. Let's see if I can get one of these fittings out of it. It originally had 3/8 fittings in it, one in, one out. And I don't know if I can get a good view of it down there. But the lines, the holes inside there, the inlet holes, you can see that that's freshly drilled. I opened them up for a -8. And the size of a -8 fitting is the same size of all the orifice on both sides, the in and out. I did it on both sides. Open up this up so it flows more fuel. So I can use the factory water separator filter on it. And I had to do the fittings too, because this is actually a -6 or a 3/8 size here. So I end up, because I want -8 fuel lines, I have to drill the fittings also a little bit. Makes them kind of thin, but they still work. Not too hard to do. Make it flow better. That was one thing I had to work out with the fuel system. I'm also going to be running that, and right before the carburetor, I'm going to be running this small element too. Put that right before the carburetor. That should take care of my fueling demands. One other problem I'm going to have to deal with. Sorry, we're going to have to go for a walk again. I thought this was going to be a short video, but I'm making it long, ain't I? My fuel tank. My fuel tank had a pickup in it, and it sucked from the top. And it's really small. It again had a 3/8 line on it. But this side, it barely measures a little over 5/16, and it has a screen. That is not going to flow very well. So what I am going to do is empty all this old gas out of this tank. And back here in the bottom corner, I am going to, after I clean this tank up, I'm going to fill it full of argon, and I am going to weld a pipe fitting on that very bottom corner for a -8 AN line. And up at top, you see where that brass fitting is. That is where this pickup used to reside. That's where I'm going to put a return line from my regulator. Put a return line in there to dump straight into the top of the tank. My pickup's going to go down there, and that should have my fuel system sorted out. Big enough for the horsepower demands I got. While I'm at it, I may put a second fuel pickup next to it. I might put 2 -8s. Like I said, I do kind of have plans to put a plate system on this. And there is the plate. It is a Nitrous Works, just an old system I had for hanging around on a shelf for years. So the fuel system's going to need a upgrade for nitrous. That pump's capable of flowing for nitrous, but I think what I want to do is buy a couple gallon fuel cell, another separate fuel cell, put in the boat with a dedicated pump, electric pump. So the nitrous system has its own dedicated pump fuel system independent of the engine. And I can also run a higher octane race fuel just in that fuel cell. Run the motor off of 91 or 93. Run the engine off 100 or whatever race gas I put in it. There's the old intake off that boat. You see the corrosion. I don't know. It's just like, I don't know if it's like salt almost. I don't know really what it is. But it definitely gets in the water. You see the size of the ports. I don't know what size ports these are. I didn't measure them. Here's the intake I'm running. I'm running a taller single plane. And the ports in that are considerably bigger than the ports in that one. But these, I am still going to have to open up a little bit to fit or to match up to that Velcro 1206 gasket. So it'll match the head. So I am going to have to do a little work on this intake. This is an Assault branded intake. Looks to me a lot like the old, I don't know if you call it a Proform or whatever. It's got huge runners in the inside of the plenum here, but it does have some casting. You can see that edge there. I'm going to have to clean that off. Every one of them runner dividers has that. I am going to mill that off the best I can. Not that I necessarily need the airflow, it just really bothers me because it's really sharp. It's really sharp, and it kind of hangs out like at least a 1/16 of an inch into that runner. This is a powder coated intake. That's the reason I got it. See, this intake was just a natural aluminum. And when I put this intake on the boat, it was brand new. I run that intake for one season, one summer, probably maybe just 4 hours. And then the boat sat outside under a boat cover without running. I did winterize it, but it just sat out under a boat cover. And you can see what happened to it. I don't know what that is. I think it's mold. I don't know, it's nasty. Anyway, that's why I got the powder coated intake. Maybe it won't do that. Got all these water lines, fittings and stuff. I was hoping I'd be able to piece together a water line system to keep this boat engine cold. I didn't quite understand how boat cooling systems work, so I had to educate myself, and they are way more complicated. A lot of jet boat guys and some just regular V-drive guys, they'll just run cold water into the boat via an impeller water pump or whatever. Jet drive, if it's a jet drive, it just the jet pressure puts the water into the engine. And they'll just run cold water into where the water pump used to go. They'll use what they call a crossover, or they'll have fittings like this, but with pipe with AN fittings in them, so they can put the water hose directly into the water jacket where the water pump used to be. They won't run a circulating water pump. Merc cruisers run a circulating water pump, but the impeller in the lower unit, from what I found out, is more than adequate to get water around through that block and out. More than adequate. You do not need to run a circulating water pump. It's just extra weight, extra maintenance, extra belt. So I am doing away with the water pump, and I am going to run these. I'm going to have them drilled and tapped to run Dash 8 fittings. And anyway, I'm getting sidetracked like I do. One of the problems with water boat systems, and a lot of people just run cold water in, run the water out of the thermostat housing, no thermostat, just at the most a restrictor plate, and then run the water right back out through the exhaust and out the boat. Problem is you don't build temperature. The engine always runs too cold. That's not necessarily too good. Optimum for power is somewhere between 140 and 160, power-wise. Fuel efficiency, a little hotter than that, but I kind of want power. I'm not too worried about fuel efficiency. So I'm going to be running a 140 degree thermostat, so it'll start to open at 140. This doohickey here is a valve that opens up, and it's designed for a cooling system with a thermostat. If when the motor's cold and the thermostat's closed, water's not circulating through the motor. So if you try to run a bypass system or this system with these fittings with a thermostat, you won't get any water out your exhaust until the thermostat opens. That could take a bit. You're running cold lake water in that engine, so you have to wait for that water to heat up. By then, your exhaust is too hot. You need water running out that exhaust at all times. That's what this valve does. When that thermostat's closed, just the water pressure from the impeller will open this up just enough to let water go through. And this water comes in from the lower unit into this. There'll be a Y or a T here. Out of one side, it'll go to the engine. The other side, it'll go to this. And then from this, it goes directly back to the exhaust, just to keep the exhaust cool until the thermostat opens. Once the thermostat opens, the water pressure from the block kind of overrides this, and it'll also dump into the exhaust. So it's just, you gotta balance this. And this is adjustable. You can adjust the spring pressure, how much tension, by taking the hose off and tightening these springs up. That's what I'm gonna be running. Try it out. Let's see, anything else? We got the carburetor. Talked about the fuel system. Talked about the water system. I still have not finished putting together my other head. I figure out what I'm going to do with that alternator. Well, that looks like that's about it. Guess I'll let you go. I'll let this video get 30 minutes long. I'm sorry. Well, talk to you next time.